So I guess I didn't really finish reading the Bleach manga after all. There was still another chapter, and maybe a lot more than that still to come. Maybe. I had heard that there was an anniversary one-shot chapter released years after the series ended, and I really didn't think it was going to be substantial, to the point where I was putting it off and I was going to wait until after I read the light novels to actually check the chapter out. That is until recently, when my friend texted me that now I need to read it ASAP, and he stressed that part, ASAP, as soon as possible. So I followed his advice, and I finally read the anniversary one-shot of Bleach that I thought wasn't going to have much importance, and that it wouldn't matter very much. Guys, I don't know if I've ever been more wrong about anything in my entire life, because this big anniversary chapter was mind-blowing, and the thing I learned right after reading it was even more mind-blowing, so we should really talk about this. All of it. This was very much essential reading for any Bleach fan, especially with the shocking implications for the future, but more on that later. Right off the bat, I was really excited to see the epilogue designs in that opening splash page, cluing me in that this story was going to take place after the big end of series time skip. Rukia's got a captain's robe, Renji's got that braided hair, and Ichigo is looking like a father. I've been reading Can't Fear Your Own World, which has been interesting seeing the period right after the war, but this placement of being after the epilogue was extra exciting too, because obviously we only spent like 2 chapters of Bleach in this time period and only got a real brief glimpse of everything. So the prospect of spending more time in this time period, even for just a chapter, was really exciting. And for the first little bit, that's what it seems like this is, checking in on Ichigo and Rukia's children, and also putting the dead Soul Reaper captains to rest. It just felt like a fun way to give us as readers real closure, to let us touch base and take stock of our losses and then move on, one final peek into this world and we can just put it all to rest. Little did I know, it was setting something else up entirely. This isn't really about closure at all. It's an opening. This story, titled No Breaths from Hell, takes place 2 years after the manga's final chapters, which is like 12 years after the Thousand Year Blood War. So this right here is the farthest into the Bleach timeline I have ever been, and possibly the farthest any reader has ever been so far, maybe? I've heard Burn the Witch, Kubo's other work, is connected to Bleach, maybe that takes place later than this. As far as I'm aware, this is the farthest I've ever gone. And it was extremely exciting to see more of the world we got a glimpse of at the end of the manga. Naturally, during the epilogue, I was curious about Ichigo's son Kazui. I was happy to see Ichigo and Orihime have a family, but a little nervous about the next generation kid aspect of it all. That doesn't always interest me, but thankfully, Kubo is giving Kazui some really mysterious hints toward what he's up to, which is a great choice. He feels important, but not entirely the central focus or the new main character or anything like that. We learned on the last pages of the main manga that Kazui is part Soul Reaper and already knows how to harness some of that power, which is intriguing on its own, but now we get even more time with him. Kazui likes to sneak out of the house at night and visit spirits, forming bonds with ghosts and trying to help them out. It's a nice reflection of Ichigo early on when he was doing similar things, back when he was just the kid that could see ghosts. I like that parallel a lot, but there's a bit of a peculiar undertone here that makes it properly unnerving, especially once we close out this chapter. Because Kazui isn't just helping protect ghost shrines or things like that Ichigo used to do, he's helping them move on, opening portals to, well, we'll get there, but he sends this ghost through a strange-looking rift that hell butterflies are coming out of. And initially I thought, oh, he's like somehow sending them to the Soul Society. Yeah. It's honestly a little creepy, especially once you learn where they're actually most likely being sent to. That's a little alarming, but it's a perfect setup to an unsettling mystery that puts Ichigo's son in a really interesting position, and there's a lot of questions now around this kid and his connection to the overarching thing that's happening in this chapter. And Ichigo and Orihime, I'm sorry to say it, but your son is kind of creepy. He is. So there's that. which alone is a big enough tease to think that this is what all this one-shot would be about. But really, the story is centering around a ceremony happening among the Soul Reapers. There's a ritual that needs to be performed when a captain dies, like 12 years later, where a hollow is killed in front of their graves, and it helps finalize putting them to rest, is what we are initially told. Kind of a weird custom, but I read this and I thought, oh, this anniversary chapter is going to bring us back to Ichigo hunting a hollow, just like old times. It's going to feel like old Bleach. Yeah, it didn't really turn out to be that way at all. Not that simple. Ichigo's been living a pretty normal life for the most part, it seems. He's a translator in his mortal profession, which is pretty interesting. And he's a family man, but naturally his Soul Reaper buddies rope him in by inviting him to the ceremony where they can truly lay Ukitake to rest. So he was invited to a funeral, essentially, and then ends up on the hunt for hollows, which is what the lieutenants are doing. You know, that's their job for the ceremony. And Ichigo thought that Renji was inviting him to that. He didn't really understand the difference, and him only being there for all of this upcoming craziness by accident because he misunderstood what he was invited to is absolutely hilarious and maybe one of my favorite Ichigo things ever. What a wonderful miscommunication and a way to show that Ichigo is still an outsider. He's still not quite like the other Soul Reapers this many years later. There's a really interesting moment here when none of the Soul Reapers notice a threat appearing behind them except for Rukia and Renji's daughter Ichika. It's treated as more than just none of the Soul Reapers turned around, you know? They don't see it or sense it happening at first, but she does. And there's a noticeable hell butterfly near her when she does. So there's some connection here between Ichika and Kazui and the mysterious happenings that are going on, kind of hinting that the kids are maybe more aware of this new threat than anyone else. Maybe they can perceive it more. I don't know. There's something weird going on with these kids. The kids aren't all right. Ichika is a fun character, and I loved her learning from Ikaku. She seems to take a little more after her father, but there is some Rukia there too. There's a risk of a character like this being kind of irritating, you know, like kind of trying to stow away with the grown-ups, but I thought she was used well as a new threat makes itself known when really strange-looking hollows attack the Soul Reapers. They were looking for a hollow, but our Soul Reapers were not ready for this. Anyone who's been watching my channel for a long time, especially videos from early on in the series, probably knows how much I love the hollows.
I love the hollows.
Really want the hollows to come back.
I love the hollows.
You know how I've been begging this whole arc for the hollows to come back, and you know how big of a fan I am of the hollows. Excited I am about the hollows coming back into the story.
They're one of my absolute favorite parts of Bleach's world, and it's a shame they became less present as the series went on. Understandable, but I always wanted more because I loved talking about them. Even the filler arcs I've been watching lately have been using hollows pretty sparingly, actually. Naturally, I was so excited to see some show up here, and they looked particularly unique as this variant of hollow we've never seen before. They just don't quite look like the usual brand. Not only do they all have like tattoos of chains on them, but their holes are on like the outside of their bodies, which is a pretty inspired choice, and offers all kinds of fun variations to their appearances. Initially I thought they were like grotesque growths or like a mutation, but we come to learn that these hollows are from hell, or as one of my patrons said, these are hellos. But yes, hell. We'll get back to that in a sec, I promise. Since these are hollows from hell, I assume they're like Shrieker and were extremely evil in life even before they became hollows, so wound up in hell instead of being purified. Very exciting, and I'd love to see Shrieker return, even in a small role, just to bring that full circle. He was one of the most interesting of the early hollows, considering he was one of the most wholly villainous through and through. So yeah, super exciting. What a grand return for the hollows with a nice little twist to help make it different. And while we had a look at the captains of this period at the end of the manga, this one-shot gives us a better look at the lieutenants, old and new, when they're tasked in retrieving the hollow for the ritual, and then have to fight these very different hollows. And when I say new, I mean some of these lieutenants are straight-up new characters created for this chapter, since there are a few vacancies that have to be filled. First, there's Atao Rindo. He's He's deaf and he speaks only in sign language but can read lips and has a very notable connection to animals. And yeah, it's really driven home how much he loves nature's creatures. This guy is like doing the Snow White thing with all the animals. They're all gathered around him. He's like Radagast the Brown of Soul Reapers, and it's pretty cool, honestly. And what we see for his Zanpakuto abilities maintains those traits of his, where he puts writing on his sword and then that writing becomes the animals that he's written down. In this case, the writing turns into paper birds that then transform into a flock of real birds that instantly peck away a hollow's flesh. Legitimately terrifying, actually, and gruesome. It's like the hollow fell into a pit of piranhas or something. It was crazy. There's also Yayahara, who is this very fun lieutenant that is very unorthodox in her style and demeanor compared to most Soul Reapers, having apparently been heavily influenced by like the fashions and culture of some groups in the living world. In this case, it's like a particular style that was popular in Japan at one point, kind of expands on the idea of, Soul Reapers kind of gain things from the living world. Really like that. Her move is, it looks like her fingernails are her Zanpakuto, it seems, and she kind of does like this like wolf fang fist bite attack, which is pretty cool. Really unique type of attack for this series. I thought that was really cool. I'm pretty sure that her fingernails are her Zanpakuto, which is fascinating. Hopefully we'll learn more. So those are the two big new lieutenants we get, and Kubo's ability to create intriguing characters with little more than design and a moment or two of action is one of his greatest strengths as a storyteller and as an artist, and these characters are no exception. Not only are they super distinct from each other, but also from any other characters in Bleach. They're both instantly notable, memorable, and I really hope we get to see more of them, but we'll talk about that later. As for some old characters that have been promoted, Akon has become a lieutenant over the time jump, which makes sense since Nemu was killed and the new version of Nemu is still just a kid. And it's great to see Akon out of the lab and in the middle of the action. It's like the very few times in James Bond when we saw Q go out into the field. It feels wrong, but also kind of right and fun, and the move we see him pull off is so perfectly him. He like creates like a chemical acidic compound to kill the hollows. Like that was pretty awesome and felt right for Akon's character. It's just cool to see him in the middle of the action. It's just weird, but I like it. And as this fight with the Hollows continues, we see a much more familiar Hollow in a Rancor return out of the blue, and I was not ready for this whatsoever, because you know who I never expected to see ever again? Xyloporo. That is Xyloporo. What the Why is Xyloporo back? Xyloporo. Outside of that brilliant scene where he was a mental manifestation of Mayori's internal conflict during the war, Xyloporo had been out of the story for a very long time, even if he hadn't quite realized it yet. So seeing him was startling to say the least, and it took me a second to even process what I was looking at, because he has a very different look here than he used to. For one thing, like the other Hollows from Hell, his hole has become more of a ring on the outside of his body, and he's got the chain pattern on him too, and parts of him like his arm are skeletal and burned away, and he's also got like demonic looking horns protruding from his head. He's just looking very different than the bespectacled nerd or the tentacled goop man that he died as, and he simultaneously seems like he's doing horribly and actually feeling pretty great, like he's evolved and ascended and appears to be more powerful in this new state, but is also like not looking very good, you know what I mean? He's apparently like the warden of hell and is kind of omniscient because he claims he's all-seeing and he knows about things like Renji's daughter, so apparently he's been watching from hell, which is scary stuff for someone that's this psychotic to know so much about you. But yeah, he's looking even more deranged than before, and he already was one of the more psychotic of the Espada, I'd say. We should also address a big factor that is also probably affecting this man, and that's the way that he died. I've said it before that Xyloporo's death is one of the most memorable defeats in the series, as well as being one of the most disturbing and maybe most haunting when you really think about it. Because of the drug Mayuri administered him with before stabbing him, Xyloporo's perception of time was slowed down to a ridiculous degree. So while it took only a few seconds for Mayuri to stab him, Xyloporo was aware and feeling that moment for a very, 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 very long time, watching and feeling his death for centuries from his perspective. It took so long for him to die. All of those passing minutes, hours, days, years, decades, entire lifetimes, watching yourself be killed by a smirking clown man and being completely unable to stop it, that's gotta be a little bit traumatizing. This man probably lost whatever mind he had, and like I said, he was already pretty crazy beforehand, there's no doubt about that. I don't think this has helped his mental health at all after that prolonged death, because after all of that, when he finally escaped his perception of what was happening to him when he died, he was then cast into hell. Yes, hell. And one thing that's been interesting to think about is why Xyloporo? Why would Kubo have Xyloporo of all characters be the herald of this new threat? Why not a different old enemy, maybe Neutra, a different Arankar, a different Espada member? Why Xyloporo? Or why even have an old enemy at all and not a new foe from hell? And I've been thinking a lot about that, of why Xyloporo is the best choice for this, and I think it comes down to a few things. I mean, obviously he was one of the most twisted and maniacal of maybe any villain. Xyloporo is a lot like Mayuri in some ways, not as smart obviously, but he's like Mayuri if Mayuri wasn't on our side. There's always been that aspect to him. He's one of the more vile enemies that we've seen in the series. And besides that, he really emphasizes people that have died returning from a horrible place and changed and altered by that place. So I think he really was the best candidate. He seems certainly evil enough, twisted enough. He has a history with quite a few characters. Yes, not with Ichigo, but Renji, Uryu, Mayuri especially. So you could do a lot of things with this guy. Plus he's very smart. Maybe he could be creating things in hell as well. He's sadistic, so probably really enjoys being the warden of hell. If an enemy was going to come back from hell, it should be someone like Xyloporo, and I really thought it was an inspired choice to take someone that was kind of a secondary villain. Like, he had a long battle before, but he was never like a major problem, and really emphasize that now he's a bigger threat and he represents something entirely new, as we've now gotten the first real threats from hell, and we really should talk about hell, so let's finally get into it. This is a huge addition to the series' lore. It's not the first time we've addressed hell in Bleach, but it has been a very long time since the one and only time we really did, when the particularly evil Hollow Shrieker was so despicable that he wasn't purified like most Hollows when he was defeated, but instead got dragged through the gates of hell by a giant hand skewering him, and I can't stress enough how long ago that was. That was chapter 12, and this one-shot is effectively chapter 687. So we essentially ran the course of the entirety of Bleach without looking further into hell, until now. Yes, there was the Hellverse movie, which was a fun watch with its own interpretation of Bleach's hell, but as I was told many times when preparing my analysis for it, and as I mentioned a few times in that video, that version of hell was not canon, and particularly noted to not be what Kubo considered his version and his vision of what he thinks hell in Bleach would really be. And now that I know this one-shot chapter has existed for 5 years, I see why people stressed that to me so strongly back when I watched it. Because people knew that this was the real hell, and his actual vision of it was starting to possibly be shown in this chapter. I enjoyed the version from the movie well enough. It had a lot of interesting things with the different visual aesthetics of the different levels to it. You had the giant skeleton guard guys. All of that was a fun ride, but lore-wise, this single chapter already presents more interesting ideas than the movie managed, and ones that feel much more additive to the rules of this universe. And when Xyloporo reveals how some of that works, damn. It's here we learn a secret that was both astounding and absolutely terrifying for what it means for this world of Bleach. When this ritual that this chapter's been centered around is performed, it turns out that the dead captain's spiritual energy, the dead captain's essence, get cast down into hell. And this is specifically done to maintain the balance. And that's really what Soul Reapers are at their core. They're balancers, you know? So it's done for the betterment of the universe because of the sheer amount of power captains have. But yes, when this ritual's performed, the energy that they had isn't brought back into the universe, really. It's thrown into hell. In other words, every single Soul Reaper captain that has ever died in Bleach is damned to hell. Every single one. And the realization of how tragic that is set in with me immediately. But captains get sent to hell. What are we doing? This is crazy. That's crazy. They have to... Oh, no. Unohana's in hell. Ukitake's in hell. Yamamoto. Do Gin and Tozen count? They were that level. Captain Amagai. And it seems that this information is not something that most are privy to, but there was one scene in the Thousand Year Blood War anime, which of course was made after this chapter was released, that maybe hints toward this. When Ukitake and Unohana both kind of say their final goodbye to each other, I think both realizing what was coming for them, and they say they'll see each other soon. So it seems that they might have known what was awaiting them after their deaths, or maybe they're speaking more broadly and not specifically thinking of hell, but it's crazy that all of these characters are pretty much damned if they're a captain. Once you die and you're a captain, you're going to hell. And they are not made aware of this when they're promoted, I don't think. Because not even Shunsui really believed in this, and he's the head captain right now. What this really means is that my boy Ikaku doesn't even know how smart he's being by avoiding becoming a captain. He's doing it just so he doesn't have to leave Squad 11, when in actuality this might be preventing him from going to hell. But here's my question. If someone like Ikaku, who has achieved Bankai and could easily become a captain if he wasn't hiding his power from his peers, if he dies, does it matter if he actually has the rank if he's kind of on that level power-wise? Do you have to literally be a captain? For I guess that's the only way this ritual is performed on captains. I don't know. If someone who dies who's as powerful as a captain and they don't do the ritual, does something bad happen? There's lots of questions and I hope to get answers at some point. Maybe we will. We'll talk about that later. I love the idea though that this represents strength coming with a cost, that those that gain great power and status must be sent down to hell in order to keep the world safe. It's a powerful message of a price always needing to be paid, something that the chapter really highlights and thematically plays into, but the scariest part is that this truth is unknown and treated as nothing more than superstition. They don't know that by performing this ritual, they have been unknowingly sending their friends and comrades down to suffer eternal damnation and hell. And it's because of the casualties in the war and sending so many captains down to hell one after another that the balance has been broken and that the mouth of hell can be opened from that side. So all of this is a delayed response to the Thousand Year Blood War. Natural ramifications of what the losses of a conflict like that might bring. It's a great way to have those events make way for something new, setting the table for this entirely new problem. I've got to say, as much as I enjoyed all the build-up and all of the new designs and the lieutenants and the new hollows, and as much as I liked seeing Xyloporo back in this really interesting way, this sequence is probably my favorite part of the chapter because Kubo is able to instill so much dread in his panels as these Soul Reapers are coming to terms with their own fates, with their own existence, and what's going to become of them at some point in time, perhaps earlier than expected, all while grappling with the truth of what they have done to their own comrades. It's all so haunting and beautiful painful and incredibly unnerving to see these cosmic beings really have to deal with their own existence and the truth of it, and seeing this truth come to light, this terrible, terrible truth. It's all handled magnificently. It's the thing I walked away from this chapter feeling the most, was just feeling bad for these characters that I love, knowing that this horrible, horrible fate awaits them at some point in time for the sake of the universe. It was great. It feels right, honestly, and the fact that hell has been a part of Bleach for so long, but never elaborated on, is beautifully incorporated here, where Xyloporo reminds us that hell has always been nearby, just mostly out of sight, but that we should have noticed the hell part of the hell butterflies, which have actually been a hint toward their namesake this entire time, and are noticeably much more prevalent in this chapter, as well as being the literal first thing we ever saw in the series. In the very first panel on the very first page of the Bleach manga was a hell butterfly flying through the sky with the traditional moon of Bleach in the background. Just two iconic images of Bleach right there from the very beginning. We had no idea of the importance of the hell butterflies. For the whole series, it seemed like they're kind of just like the Harry Potter owls of Bleach, where they're just used for sending messages. The name hell butterflies has always been kind of like, that's odd, but I never really thought much about it, but they've been around since literally the very beginning, and now are finally getting some explanation, and it turns out the threat has been right in our faces from the very first panel of the very first page of the very first chapter of the manga. Hell has always been nearby. It's crazy. It's just a really cool way to pull something in and make it feel like it's been there the whole time. Maybe Kubo has planned this the whole time, and if not, he's done a great job of making it feel like he has. When Ichigo shows up to take on Xyloporo, he is of course made aware of this whole new problem, and their fight's so funny because when looking back, they never met each other before, but obviously Xyloporo, whether through Aizen's plans or through his now supposed all-seeing self, knows who Ichigo Kurosaki is, but Ichigo doesn't know this guy, and I love that moment where he's just, Ichigo Kurosaki, who the hell are you? It reminded me of Thanos and Scarlet Witch in Avengers Endgame, but their fight's interrupted as Xyloporo is skewered by Ukatake's blade emerging from the gates of hell. What an image! That very iconic looking Zanpakuto with the talismans attached, pulling him in and reeling him back into hell, mirroring the first time we saw those gates way back in the day. And the Hell Hollows were killed in front of Ukatake, so apparently that counts. The ceremony went through, and Ukatake's power has been fully sent to hell now. All of this and all of these events just raised so many interesting possibilities. The obvious one that came to mind is with every Soul Reaper captain that's ever died in hell, there's a chance we'll see some of those characters again, like Yamamoto, Unohana, Ukatake. But the thought that got me even more excited is that there's the original 13 captains, well technically the 11 other ones, that we only saw a glimpse of in the manga, but that Kubo went out of his way to flesh out for this recent anime. And what seemed like a fun elaboration may have actually been setting up that group for the future if we do end up exploring hell. After all, the story made a point to tell us just how bad the original 13 captains were back in the day, which might make them the perfect candidates to be antagonists in hell. And then there's also the possibility of all the other previous Kenpachis we never met, and naturally the idea of Zaraki taking on all of his predecessors is just hype in the purest form, or like him and Unohana in hell fighting all the other Kenpachis. I need it, I want it, I hope it happens. And if there are more dead Arancars down there, then maybe we could see Stark, or even His Majesty King Baragan himself. That is an incredible possibility that I need. It's just crazy how many avenues this one chapter opened up in front of us. And as I was reading, I was sad that it didn't seem like we'd ever really get a chance to explore those possibilities, despite Xyloporo cryptically saying he would return before he got pulled back. It was like, damn, why is this just an anniversary chapter? There's so much setup. And then I reached the very end of this chapter, where it mentions the Howl from the Jaws of Hell arc, which seemed like confirmation that this is the beginning of a whole new saga for the series, which is extremely exciting on its own. But I knew this chapter came out years ago and hadn't ever heard of there being a new arc out, but immediately following my reading, the same friend that told me to read the chapter ASAP sent me links to news articles from at the time of recording a few weeks ago. And those articles said that there are rumors that Bleach's manga will soon be returning to continue this story, which is unbelievable. And it's hard for me to put into words what my initial feelings were on this, but thankfully, my patrons got to see my actual reaction live, so I'll just show you a little bit of that so you understand what I was feeling in this moment as this news arrived. That says the latest reports indicate Bleach's return to Weekly Shonen Jump magazine with Hell Arc adaptation. Bleach is a legendary manga when it comes to the shonen genre. Bleach having ended 10 years ago, this series is still has a dedicated fan base that is yearning for the return of Tite Kubo, according to massive reports that have been circulating on June 20th, so like a week ago. This is why people said ASAP. Oh my god. It appears that their wish is finally being granted. Weekly Shonen Jump is preparing for the biggest reveal of the year, and that could be the return of Bleach manga with a brand new arc called the Hell Arc. We're getting more Bleach manga. Maybe. It's crazy. For fans unfamiliar with Bleach, the Hell Arc is the Hell area of Bleach is largely unexplored in the story, and this would be the perfect spot for larger world building and the introduction of exciting new characters and villains. At the moment, with no official announcement, we have very limited information about this new arc and its serialization. What? We've got a whole new arc potentially coming. I know they said it's not confirmed, so I'm trying to... That's a lot to take in. Between the chapter itself, that 70-something pages of craziness, and the announcement from a week ago? I don't know what to say. That's crazy. I was going to say that one shot did not feel like a one shot or an ending. It felt like it was setting up a whole new thing. And so yes, it seems that there's a chance that Bleach is coming back with an entirely new arc that will continue from this chapter, and that is absolutely insane to think about and to fathom, and has me beyond excited because I need to see this all expanded on. All of this was so great, but part of what made it great was how many new ideas it was bringing. Ideas that seem like natural continuations for a story that seemed to be mostly over, but isn't. There are so many more possibilities now to explore, new adventures to be had. So I hope it's true. So badly I need it to be, because I can't be left hanging like this, and I know some of you have waited like 5 years since this anniversary chapter came out, so who am I to complain? But I'm just gonna join you guys in hoping for this story to continue, because this was such a fun setup for what seems like something that could be a thrilling new adventure for Ichigo and the rest of the cast. I adored this chapter. If this is the kind of stuff Kubo is setting up, and this is the quality he's going to give us if he returns, and if Bleach returns, then all I can say is, hell yeah. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm sure I'll be talking about this chapter more, and hopefully much more if the rumors turn out to be true. Crazy, just super exciting news, and I'm glad I got here when I did, because I feel like I'm gonna be here waiting with you guys and hopefully celebrating if it does come to pass. But I'm gonna try to keep my expectations in check, not get my hopes up in case it doesn't happen. But for now, I'm just extremely excited and really happy with this chapter. It was really fascinating and way different than I thought it was going to be. So yeah, let me know what you thought of this chapter. I'm sure some of you read this like 5 years ago and have been waiting ever since. I don't envy you. It's I guess now I'm fully caught up with the manga for the time being, maybe? We'll see. For now, that's all. If you want to see the full reaction to me reading this chapter, reading along with me, it's on Patreon. You can find it there. It was a lot of fun to do and shocking. And if you want to see more, including me watching the 1,000-Year Blood War Core 4 week to week, you can join the Patreon, and I have reactions over there and reviews every Saturday here on YouTube. That'll do it for now. Thank you all for being here as always. Thanks for supporting the channel, the Patreon. I really appreciate it. Hope you all have a great day. Take care. Bye.